This video is part of a series using the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a lens to learn about the Enneagram, and the Enneagram to learn about the MCU. You can watch it in whatever order you want, you're the boss of you, but if you'd like to start at the beginning, you can find the full playlist at the first link in the description or in the card up here.
Today we're going to talk about Okoye, and we're going to talk about Enneagram Type 6, the Loyalist. Type 6's basic desire is for security and support, and their basic fear is of having no support or guidance and being unable to survive on their own. This desire for support tends to lead them to look to institutions, belief systems, traditions, and relationships that grant them a sense of security, but their considerable fear and driving anxiety tend to lead them to be incredibly suspicious of new ideas, systems, and especially authority figures. Once they have deemed something or someone worthy of their trust, though, they will fight to the death and go down with the ship. I'll take a second to point out the obvious, which is that Okoye is a much less prominent and dynamic character than Bruce Banner, to such an extent that depending on your fan stats, you might not recognize her by name, in which case, this is Okoye. She's the Wakandan general who originally appeared in Black Panther and was criminally underutilized as one of the survivors of the snap in Avengers Endgame, but we're not doing film criticism. So why, in a series about character analysis, am I devoting an entire episode to a character who's had maybe 30 minutes of cumulative screen time so far? Well, because I decided to do this with a comic book franchise, and finding a 6 there can be a little tricky since the genre trends pretty aggressively in the rugged individualist vigilante direction. The whole superhero fantasy tends to revolve around this idea that this one person is stronger, smarter, morally better than whatever authorities could be put in place, and Type 6s search for something outside of themselves to depend on in the average to unhealthy levels, and a sense of place in and contribution to something bigger than themselves in the healthy levels doesn't obviously or immediately gel too well with that. To say nothing of the fact that if Type 6 has a defining characteristic, it's, well, paralyzing fear.
Unlike other types who repress or at least distract themselves from their fears and anxieties, 6s seem to be constantly conscious of them.
So what possesses me to look at this stone-cold badass and see a bundle of nerves? Well, while 6s can be anxious in a way that's obvious to the people they come into contact with,
What do we do? Panic? Freak? I usually panic, but I am happy to freak.
one of their most typical experiences is feeling far more anxious than they let on. And not all 6s respond to their anxiety with constant stomach aches.
6s learn to cope with fear either by reacting with it or against it. Some 6s express themselves more aggressively, while others are more visibly timid. In most 6s, these two tendencies coexist, alternately taking the upper hand.
So what you get is a bit of a duality. 6s will either embrace and live into their fears, or try to get out ahead of them by pouring on the bravado. This is often referred to as phobic versus counterphobic behavior, or as I like to think of it, I'm scared versus I'm not scared, you're scared. At first blush, that counterphobic impulse definitely seems like Okoye's default. She's a friggin' general. But the closer you watch this character, the more clear it becomes that she's got quite a bit of the phobic to her too. But this anxiety isn't all bad. It's also the source of one of Type 6's greatest strengths. They are exceptional planners and strategists.
Because of their underlying vigilance and sensitivity to danger signals, 6s foresee problems and can head them off at the pass. They are natural troubleshooters and often save themselves, their families, or their companies many headaches by spotting irregularities or potential problems.
So as fierce and strong as she is, it's just as often Okoye's ability to anticipate and plan for all contingencies that makes her the top-notch fighter she is.
Just don't freeze when you see her.
What are you talking about? I never freeze.
You froze.
Now, anxiety is not a thing unique to sixes. Both colloquial and clinical anxiety can and do come along with all of the 9 types. I mean, we just did a whole episode on Bruce Banner, for crying out loud. So it's important to understand what's specifically at the root of it for this type.
The central issue for type 6 is a failure of self-confidence. Sixes come to believe that they do not possess the internal resources to handle life's challenges and vagaries alone, and so increasingly rely on structures, allies, beliefs, and supports outside themselves for guidance.
Okoye looks to her country, specifically her country's traditions, as well as her marriage and her relationship with T'Challa. Under normal circumstances, these touchpoints seem to be pretty well in line with one another, but then Killmonger shows up, it all goes to shit, and some difficult choices have to be made.
While some types have a powerful inner critic in their heads, sixes have an inner committee. Thus, when they have to make a decision, sixes will feel caught between various internal voices arguing for different positions and responsibilities.
In this newly turned world, loyalty to Wakanda, loyalty to the way Wakanda has always done things, loyalty to T'Challa, and loyalty to Wakabi are suddenly all in conflict. In the ensuing chaos, you can just see the gears turning in Okoye's head as she decides exactly whether, when, and how to push back against this outsider who has rolled up like he owns the place, killed the king she trusted, started putting plans in motion to give away the resources she's fought to keep secret, and burned her sacred flowers and shit, but somehow done it all within the bounds of the tradition she has sworn to protect. And as her inner committee debates, one voice comes out the loudest: the letter of the law.
Sixes increasingly turn to safe bets, reliable procedures, and tried and true methods for solving problems. Doing things the way they have been done before gives sixes a feeling of weight and solidity. With other people or with tradition behind them, they feel they have the backup they need to move ahead.
I am loyal to the throne, no matter who sits upon it. What are you loyal to?
Killmonger may not be trustworthy, and his plans may fly in the face of the way things have always been done, but the laws of Wakanda say that he is king, and so Okoye will protect his right to rule. Until, that is, it turns out that he doesn't have the right. T'Challa is alive, which means Killmonger never won his challenge, which means he never became king. But he doesn't step down, nor does he resume the challenge. He insists that he is king. Victory in ritual combat or no victory in ritual combat, and that makes him a traitor.
Should sixes have any reason to suspect their authority of being unjust or unwise, their feelings of doubt can blossom quickly into rebellion or rejection.
Your heart is so full of hatred. You are not fit to be a king.
But Okoye's rebellion doesn't stop with the pretender to the throne. Another one of her sure things has betrayed her country too. Her husband, Wakabi, who continues to fight on Killmonger's side even after it's clear he has lost all legitimate legal right.
Wakabi, the challenge is not complete.
And in a shining example of the true badassery at the heart of Type 6, Okoye shuts that down.
Would you kill me, my love?
For Wakanda? Without question.
God, she's so freaking cool. And I swear I'm not just saying that because I have a really strong 6 wing.
And as much as paralytic debating indecisiveness is a hallmark of Type 6, so is this chips or down decisiveness.
In highly significant matters, sixes usually have strong opinions and can be rather inflexible because they have settled their doubts sometime in the past and have come to a conclusion to which they can then doggedly adhere.
We see this from her again in Infinity War in the face of Wakanda's total destruction. Despite her apparent doubts about letting the weird shiny people in to fight a battle for the fate of the universe that will likely rip her beloved country to pieces,
When you said we were going to open Wakanda to the rest of the world, this is not what I imagined.
when T'Challa gives the order to let the Legion of Monsters through the barrier, she is totally calm, cool, collected, and confident.
This will be the end of Wakanda.
Then it will be the noblest ending in history.
For Okoye, T'Challa himself is a sure thing, even beyond Wakanda.
And look, again, I'm not doing film criticism, and even if I were, there are so many things to consider in the construction of a 2-movie event with a starring cast of dozens and over a decade's worth of build-up beyond the emotional arc of one supporting character. I get it. But this is why I find it to be such a bummer that we don't see more from Okoye in Endgame.
Obviously, the snap is tragic for everyone, but this is like specifically tailored to hit every one of her worst buttons. Her country is leveled. Her trusted king vanished into thin air while his hand was in hers. There can be no tradition to tell her what should be done in this situation. And I, for one, would love to see how this woman went from watching the deepest fear at the core of her being come to fruition to willingly working with the remaining ragtag band of Avengers to rebuild and protect not just her own country, but the world at large. Especially since, hey, that sounds a whole lot like Type 6's path of integration.
Healthy sixes are able to recognize the common bonds they share with all of humanity. They feel inclusive and accepting of others, regardless of whether their views or lifestyles are familiar to them. Thus, integrating sixes, like healthy nines, can approach tremendous challenges and even tragedies or threats with inner balance and equanimity.
So, there's my wish list, I guess. Dear Marvel Studios, can I please have a Disney Plus series or something about Okoye putting Wakanda back together while Natasha slowly earns her trust and convinces her to become an Avenger? Be really convenient for my content. Please. In the meantime, if you want a more in-depth example of a dynamic six, Chidi Anagonye from The Good Place is not just a punchline. I really do think he's a patron saint of the type. But which resident of neighborhood 12358 West are you is another series for another day. And ultimately, from a narrative standpoint, I still think Okoye is a great example of one reason why the Enneagram can be a great tool for writers specifically to have in their boxes. She's one of a good number of supporting characters whom the audience meets for the first time in a context without much time to spare for individual backstories that still shines in each of its characters' incredibly specific points of view. Black Panther is a movie that is driven by a bunch of people who fundamentally disagree about how to handle an unprecedented situation, who are all at least a little bit wrong, but who are all at least a little bit right, where even with the limited backstory, the conflict is so much deeper and clearer than two opposing forces and the people who support them. Now, as I've said, I'm not arguing in the least that anyone involved in this movie had the Enneagram in mind when they made it. But if you're a writer looking to do what they did, you could do worse than to have the Enneagram in your pocket. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, with an extra special thank you to Andreas Evans, Critters Mai, Kaya, Lizzie Gray, LL Milk Tray, Mateo, Michelle, and Nikki Miskell. Special thanks also to Ramaj Autumn for that incredible track based on the Avengers fanfare. If you'd like to join me this month in donating to the People's City Council Los Angeles, who are doing some incredible organizing work around getting the LAPD defunded, you can find a link in the description.